All right, I'm going to get us started so we can get out on time. But welcome everyone that's here. Hopefully, some more folks will trickle in. But welcome. You're here for the Idea to Law training. So, we're teaching you how to take a bright idea and turn it into actual legislation and getting it passed. So, we'll dive right in. I'm Natalie Schilling. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Associate at Awake. Really excited to be here. Thanks for spending your hour on your weekday with me. So, kind of first up, something that I've gotten asked before, and that I think is important is that who can actually come up with bill ideas? And the fun question answer to that is that anyone can come up with a bill idea. So whether that's individuals like you, often a lot of times organizations will come up with a bill idea. And beyond that, like corporations can bring bills to sponsors. Maybe a police force will bring a bill idea. City councils, judges, business chambers, pretty much anyone can come up with a bill idea to bring to a sponsor. So no imposter syndrome here. Anyone can come up with a bill idea. But you need a lawmaker or decision maker to actually carry it. Obviously, you can't walk into the Senate and decide, I'm going to present a bill today. So you need to find someone that's willing to take that idea and that bill and carry it for you. And then another question is, so I have this idea I want to turn into bill, but is like state legislation the only formal avenue of change? And by formal, I mean something that's like actively has something moving with it. So there's obviously lots of types of change. A lot of that can come from just like systemic change in terms of like the attitudes and ideas people have within society, but we're talking about specifically formal change. So there are different avenues of formal change. So the main thing we're going to be talking about today is a law that goes through the Tennessee General Assembly and is through the Tennessee Code Annotated, which is basically our big book of all of the laws. And that lives in the virtual space. And there also are the like big actual physical books they print out. And these are actually enforceable. So they'll have mechanisms in place to enforce them, whether that's through like criminal law or fees, penalties, that kind of thing. But these are actually enforceable. So we're going to talk about that a lot. There's also an avenue of change called a resolution. So these can be brought by the General Assembly, and it's basically a statement of intent or honoring. And these don't actually have an impact on the law. They're more messaging situations. So someone might bring a resolution honoring a certain person, or they might wish they could make change on one issue, but like they don't have the political will right now. So they'll put like a statement of intent of like, we intend to work on this. So that's a resolution, also needs to be brought by members, but it's just kind of like a different avenue, way to speak about an issue. Another kind of avenue of change that one could go through is a county ordinance. So these happen at the city council level, and they only apply to the county that they're passed in. So unlike the legislation that impacts the entire state, this would specifically impact counties. And this is a really powerful force of change at the local level. So if there's something when you're considering your bill idea, if it might work better at the local level, or you might want to start at the local level and see how it works and then pitch it to the higher level. As Kelly said, yeah, drop some Q&A questions into the chat or the Q&A box. Also, there's an idea of or an avenue of change called departmental change. So this is something that can happen inside your government department or like a nonprofit organization. So this would be advocacy to change a rule or change something, how something works internally for somewhere. And maybe that just happens by talking to leaders in your organization or government department, or you can petition from citizens to change how something works. But this would be a change that happens kind of at that mezzo, we call it in social work, that like middle level of like within an advocacy organization or government department. So it's also something if you see like there's an issue with the DHS, Department of Human Services, you don't like how they're doing something, and you're like, okay, well, I could do a bill or I could just work with the people in leadership and see if I can get the department to change that rule. So this is also an avenue of change. But today we're really going to be focusing on legislation and how to take your idea and make it a law. So, this is kind of the overview of the steps we'll take of identifying the issue, researching solutions, finding sponsors, drafting that legislation, working the bill, and then getting it signed into law. So, it's kind of the big major steps, and we're going to go into each. So, first step, just identifying your issue. 90% of the of the bill here is actually understanding what the issue is so that you can have a solution. So first you want to look at what is the problem to solve here. So what am I really looking at? We want to make sure you're actually solving the problem and not symptoms of the problem. And so one of the important ways is really to understand the issue, get deeper, get down into the roots of what is this problem actually caused by, and let's make sure we can reach those roots of the problem. So that's that go deeper, find the root causes. And something that's also really important for Awake, and that's important just in general, is making sure that you're talking to the people closest to the issue or the ones most impacted. So you can really understand directly from folks, okay, what is this issue like to live with? Or what dimensions are maybe not included in research and that actually the people close to the issue would understand. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit on that understand the issue and give you an example of something that I've been doing at Awake and just like an example of research you can do to understand the issue. So with our bill addressing period poverty, when I first started out looking at what law should we do, I started with this period poverty research. So this is my like actual table of contents from the research I did before we went and did the period product bill. So I started with that top level defining the issue. So I was really looking at what is period poverty? Who is impacted by it? What does this entail? And then I actually went even further and we talked about, okay, so what are all of the different funding mechanisms to fix this problem? So how have some people fixed the problem? Is that at the state level? Is it at the local level? And then also, as I was researching, I found, one big solution is the fact that Medicaid and TANF don't cover it. And so that might be a solution. So we really dug into that. And then some model legislation, the whole history of it regarding period poverty in Tennessee. At Awake, we do something called an equity lens. So every time we're looking at a piece of policy, we want to examine how does this impact different groups differently. And as we're actually writing the policy, we perform that equity lens again to make sure that our solution is equitably impacting folks, and really considering that not only in how the bill is written, but what if it does go into effect, how do we track that? How does it go into place? So that's what we do. Highly recommend, but up to you, and we can share that resource after. And then something that we did specifically with period poverty was thinking, kind of trying to outside the box, unique solutions. So what are things that maybe we wouldn't initially think are mechanisms of change here that might work? So for example, we thought about doing like a state partnership with a period product organization like Always or Tampax and doing like a matching program. So really trying to think outside the box. But this is just a real example of how I've gone about research and understanding the issue. Also, for researching policy solutions, a huge factor is looking at what have other states done. Almost all the time, whenever you're looking at a piece of policy, other states have tried something. Obviously, there's going to be those rare cases where no one's tried anything to fix this problem and you're going to be the first. That's huge. But a lot of the times, another state has done something to try to fix this problem. So we'll look at actually how you look into that, what databases, how can you look at that? So that'll be next. And then even in Tennessee, it's really important to know what solutions, if there are any, have been attempted. So a lot of times you'll look at an issue and be like, I need to start a bill from scratch, when really there have been lawmakers in the past that have already tried to fix this issue. Maybe they didn't go far, but it's important to look back and see, okay, so this lawmaker has tried this solution a couple different times. And that's helpful to know, even just as a starting base. Oh, okay, so this lawmaker is really a champion of this issue and has worked hard in it. So we need to approach them and check in with them about this problem and see what you can glean from just conversations with them. And then it's also really helpful in looking at those, like what solutions have been attempted, just going back and watching the videos of if it did get to a debate. Okay, so what issues did people have with this solution? Why didn't it go forward? Because that can really help in your choice of what policy you go with. That really helps you inform, oh, okay, so this solution they really didn't like because of the funding source. So maybe I need to be really creative about a funding stream for this and think differently. So just looking at right here in Tennessee, what have we tried, is really helpful in your policy research. And then which avenue of change is best fit for the problem? So we kind of went over those other formal avenues of change. Sometimes it might not be the best solution to start with a bill and go like at the state level. So maybe, for example, a pilot program in a local school district to fix an issue might be a better solution to start with. Or maybe a study is going to be really important because there's just not enough information on this issue so that you can take that and get recommendations. So it's really important to sit and think, okay, is a piece of policy going to be the best fit for this problem? And then once you do decide that, then we can keep going. So zooming back to the where to find other state laws, there's a couple different places that you can do this. I mean, number one is just Googling what solutions have other states done to fix insert problem here. I mean, that's usually my first step is just to throw the big issue and solutions into a Google search bar and just start reading, start looking. But specifically, another way to find that, besides just like broadly searching in Google, is there's a lot of really cool legislative tracking databases that catalog every single bill across the entire country, and they keep those pretty up to date on where they're at in the legislative process, if they died, if not. And so the two main ones that I know of, and there's like a billion of them, but we've worked with Bill Track 50 and then Legiscan. So these are both nationwide policy tracking databases. I believe both of those do require like a subscription, but I don't think it's super expensive. But those are just like tracking databases that are good for just like a one-stop shop. You can find everything you need about other state laws. And then also, besides just the big legislative tracking databases, a lot of websites from like organizations have issue specific traffic, the tracking. So instead of having to go in and do all the work, some of these organizations and websites already do it for you. So, for example, we worked on a bill on fertility care this past year, and I found a website by resolve.org that tracked legislation across the country on all bills related to fertility care. So that was really helpful to just hop on and be like, okay, so Georgia's doing this, Alabama did this, these are some of the northern states are doing this. So there's a lot of issue specific tracking. Or this other one that I threw in here, the goodmatcher.org, that one did like all policies affecting birth control. So there is a ton of issue specific tracking websites that you can use to really get a big picture view of all the different solutions that are being presented across the country. And so those websites are really helpful because they do a lot of the work for you. Obviously, there's not a website for every single issue, but if you can find one, they're really helpful. But if there's nothing like that, then just plain old Google search will be really helpful. So yeah, that's where I would say to find other state laws. I think someone submitted that question before, so I hope that answers that. Okay, so the research step is a big step. So I'm keeping going. So once you've really figured out, okay, here's what here's what different states are doing. Here's what like, okay, so this legislation is the best avenue for it. You want to start to narrow down solutions. So you have a pretty good menu of what's available. You want to start to go through and think about, okay, so what are the pros and cons of each? So for example, if I'm looking at three different policies related to childcare. I might think, okay, so there's one policy that would require a funding source that would be like millions of dollars. It would be a big change. There's one that's more regulatory that would just change little small statutes throughout that would maybe make a more tangible impact. And then maybe there's like a grant solution where you're creating a new fund to help people. So you would want to sit through and think about, okay, what are the pros and cons? What for this state at this time might be the solution that would best fit the problem? And I want to kind of harp on this last point, selecting the best or the most realistic. So there's something in the advocacy world where we have messaging bills and then we have bills that we're actually aiming to pass. So for a messaging bill or the best solution, these are something that we are not tampering down the mess. Like we're not trying to make this the most realistic. We're trying to project a vision for a solution for this issue. So that would be having a big, broad, for example, in the Reproductive Justice Coalition, we bring one many years in a row, have brought one many years in a row that is repealing the abortion ban and has a complete reworking of the reproductive justice system here in Tennessee. So obviously, right now, that's not going to pass, but it's really important that we bring that solution to remind people of what our vision for Tennessee is and how we want to bring it about. And so having these messaging bills are really important because then you don't have to water down your message. You don't have to simplify. You don't really have to compromise what you're actually bringing for that solution. That's a really good way to be able to talk about an issue. And then a lot of times here in Tennessee, we may have a really fantastic idea, but we need to be realistic if you want something to pass and may have to simplify a lot and narrow it down to a more realistic solution. So, what might we actually be able to pass here in Tennessee? And that's inspired by all kinds of things, but this is a really important consideration before you move forward of, okay, am I selecting like a messaging best bill or am I going for something that I'm actually aiming to pass that's like realistic that we think could get done here in Tennessee? So we have to have those conversations a lot internally at Awake and try to aim some to pass and aim some for messaging. Yes. So also, furthermore, on here, also consider what your goal is for this legislation. So, is your goal to communicate a vision for Tennessee? Or is your goal more making incremental change, moving the needle a little bit of an issue? Or is your goal for the legislation to get press hits, to get quotes in the media? So if you're really thinking about those, there's two of those that fit more for a best messaging bill of like communicating a vision, getting press hits, versus a realistic solution that might have some incremental change that little bit by little bit moves the needle to help build momentum for that big dreaming of an idea solution. And you'll want to pick a solution that best accomplishes your goal. So, which is going to best accomplish this solution, and then go forward with that method. Okay, so now that you've kind of narrowed down your solution all the way to one choice, whether that's a messaging bill or realistic, then comes the fun step of drafting legislation. So, where I always start with drafting legislation is seeing if I have any sample bill language from other states, and looking at that bill language and coming up with language that I like, that our team likes, that fits with our vision. Um, especially important is looking at states with similar politics. So, a lot of the times I'll look at fellow Southern states, drift into the Midwestern states a little bit, because if you can find bill language that works in similar political states, it's a really helpful talking point to be like, yes, this bill is inspired by Alabama's legislation. And that's going to take you a lot further than saying, oh, this was inspired by New York's legislation or something like that here in Tennessee. So looking at those different bill languages of other states, seeing what you want to copy paste, seeing what really speaks to what you wanted the solution to be. Now, a lot of us are not legal experts and don't really fully understand, like, how do I even write bills like this? That's okay. There's a place in legal scholars at the Tennessee General Assembly that will actually help make that idea and some of that language into actual legal terms and legal language for making your bill into a law. So, like, you really don't have to worry too much about getting it like exactly perfect and having all of the little headings and all of that. Like, the Tennessee General Assembly will make that happen. So, what you really want to do is figure out what language you like and what language would be your vision for your final bill. Um, and then you can go from there. So, yeah, using that language as starting points to adapt from. And then once again, we think it's really important to look at our language with an equity lens. So, how is the exact language that you're going for equitable, and looking at them and seeing, okay, so this is an inclusive term, or maybe whatever that may be. How does this language specifically further equity? And sometimes you can't have the most equitable, great language in the world. We had a situation like that with one of our bills where we ultimately had to decide to use a less inclusive term because we knew in Tennessee some things are going to stop your bill from proceeding just because of ideological politics. So ideally, you can have a fully equitable bill, but it's important to just conduct that assessment and know going forward where your legislation stands. So I kind of mentioned the legal at the General Assembly. So these are lawyers that work at the General Assembly, and all day long, what they do is draft legislation and draft amendments. So they're super familiar with the code, that Tennessee Code annotated I mentioned before. They know it in and out. They know how you're supposed to format it. They know what terms you need to include. And they also are really good at making sure it's in compliance with other sections. So if a definition for something is established in a different section of code, they make sure yours is fitting with that. They are really checking and making sure that your bill is fitting with the other sections of code. So the good news is that you don't have to be an expert in policy to be able to bring this bill to someone. There's scholars and experts at the General Assembly who can help draft that. Once you work with legal, you get to something that you like, you'll settle on a final draft to file. So, a lot of times, when you bring a piece of legislation to legal at the General Assembly, they're not able to take your like exact wording and put it into a bill. Sometimes they're going to have to fiddle with it, change it around to make sure it's like in compliance or just to their preference. And that can be a fun little back and forth. You'd be like, "Ooh, I really don't like how you changed that. I think that completely changes the message. Can you make it more like this?" And it's rarely a back and forth situation. There might be some things they're hard lined on, but this is usually a pretty back and forth process to see if you can settle on something that you guys like. But once you do, you find a draft that you can live with that fits what you think it's still your goal is. You can settle on that one to file. And just this is a good place to circle back to if that language accomplishes your goal, making sure, okay, with this final draft, is it doing what I hope it's doing? Is it doing what I wanted my solution to do? And that's important just to check in to make sure in the process of going from researching solutions to solidifying to the language that nothing has gotten lost in the process and your bill is completely off base with what your goal for it was. It's really important to circle back. So, all and the process here can be flipped around. So maybe you have your sponsor first and then you work with them on language. Other times you have like a perfect bill that you bring to them and they're like, "Okay, I'll go file it." It depends. It depends on what you want to do. Some people do it one way, some people do it another. So, in the past we've pretty much stuck with this doing this legislation first and then finding our sponsor, but take that with a grain of salt. Sometimes it happens the other way around, but important step is finding and securing your sponsors. So you'll want to sit down with ideally some other folks that are experienced in the legislature. If you have a lobbyist, if you're part of an organization, but just sit down and think about who might be the best sponsor for this bill. So there's a lot of really niche knowledge that, like, especially a lobbyist will know about the different lawmakers that is really helpful. But if you're just like a regular person, even just looking at the General Assembly webpage, and you can look and see what each lawmaker, what bills they've sponsored in the past, what organizations or community things that they're a part of. Even just like looking at their campaign web pages, I've done before of looking to see what issues matter to which people, what have they talked about before, what careers have they done. So maybe you're doing a bill that has like a medical solution. You might want to look at the doctors that are lawmakers, like Representative Brian Terry is a doctor or Doc Kumar is a doctor. So sometimes it might be helpful to look at careers. So there's ways to like brainstorm and find sponsors, even if you don't have a lobbyist. Just looking at those General Assembly pages, trying to see, okay, who might be interested in this bill? Really important when you're brainstorming the best sponsor for it is to consider political capital. So political capital is okay, how much sway do they have over the legislature? How much power do they have? And that's really important to consider because if you pick someone that maybe has no political capital, has very little likelihood of swaying the other people in their committees, your bill might not be as successful. So people that have a lot of political capital are leadership. So Representative William Lamberth in the House, he has a ton of political capital. Maybe some more of the like committee chairs have a lot of political capital. Obviously, like the Speaker of the House, Speaker of the Senate, tend to have more of that. And then just some of the political capital is kind of understated that you kind of just learn from being at the Capitol and at the General Assembly. But a good rule of thumb is like those chairs and those leadership will have a little bit more, and also older members will tend to have more political capital in that they've grown trust with certain other lawmakers, more experienced. So consider that, if you're trying to get a bill that's passing, giving it to a brand new lawmaker might be less beneficial than someone who's more seasoned, who has more connections within the Capitol. And then also thinking about personal connection to the issue. So a dream scenario is finding a sponsor that cares a ton about the issue or learns to care a lot about the issue. And if they have some personal connection to it. So maybe their wife had a struggle with infertility. So now they really, really care about that issue. So that person might be a great person to bring a bill on fertility care. So just really trying to, if you can find from those like websites, from insider knowledge by asking around, finding people that might have personal connections to that issue in order to approach them because they're going to be more passionate about that bill. They might work for it more than someone who has no connection to the issue. And then, sometimes you just have to wild pitch. You just have to be like, I have no idea how they feel about this, but I'm going to bring this bill to them and I'm just going to see what they think. Um, and just go for it. So that would be pitching to your ideal sponsor. So if you select like there's these three different lawmakers that would be great sponsors, you want to go in having a really solid pitch in mind. So you'll need to really, I think I have a, yeah, you'll need to be prepared with a really informed pitch of why this bill would be advantageous for this sponsor. So even if it might be the best bill in the world, if this legislator doesn't feel like there's any advantage to them bringing that bill or they don't care about it, they're not going to sponsor the bill. So if you can think about, okay, well, this bill could be really advantageous to you because it would connect a lot with the young people in your district, blah, blah, blah. Just finding ways to make it appealing for them. What's in it for them? Because they're sitting back there thinking, why would I carry this bill for you? You want to make that really strong pitch of, well, obviously, here's why it's important, but also, why is this important for them to carry? Something that I also like to do before I walk into a lawmaker's office is looking at what bills they've proposed in the past. So if they're not a brand new lawmaker, looking at, okay, in the past they've sponsored this type of bill or these types of legislation or co-sponsored. It's really helpful to see, okay, so they do a lot in healthcare or they do a lot of bills focused on issue or all of that fun stuff. It's helpful to know what bills they've brought in the past so you can connect their priorities to your bill. So whether that's, if I'm approaching a lawmaker who's done a lot on education and diapers, I might be able to be like, okay, so that connects really well to period products because these are really impacting both. Being able to say, yeah, this is really in line with what you've brought in the past and being able to connect it for them of like, this is a priority for you. And so you should bring this bill. It fits with all these others. And then this is kind of like a cherry on top. But if you can find advocates for the bill in their district before you walk into a meeting, that can be really helpful to be able to cite, hey, these specific constituents of yours want this bill. So, for example, we called all the superintendents in Tennessee and asked them if they provided period products and how they felt about it. And from there, we were able to find a solid group of people from across the state that cared about the issue that were in this in these people's district. And so walking into Leader Lambert's district or in their office, I could say, hey, XYZ nurse in this high school that you went to really cares about this bill, so you should really sponsor, like she would really love it. There's a way to like bring that in and at the end of the day they have to report back to their constituents, and if they can feel solid about their constituents want this bill, you're going to have a lot better shot at securing them as your sponsor. If you don't have that, that's okay. They might just be swayed by your incredible presentation. But it's helpful to have these extra little tools in your toolkit in case they aren't fully swayed by just your bill pitch alone. But when you walk into that office, make sure you're really solid on what the bill does. If you can, bring in all of what definitions you're going to use, what sections of code, because they're going to want to know, okay, what is this bill? What's it impacting? And just have your really solid pitch of why this bill matters right now. So if you can bring data, personal stories, always helpful. And then ideally, you give the best pitch they've ever experienced, and they are like, okay, I'm totally going to sponsor this bill for you. Reminder that you need a sponsor in the House and a sponsor in the Senate. So don't focus all your efforts on your House sponsor and forget that you need a Senate sponsor because you need both. So ideally, you pitch to your ideal sponsors and you get those willing sponsors in both the House and the Senate. Then it comes the fun time to work the bill, to actually really try to get it across the finish line. You'll want to find support and co-sponsors. So in the legislature, people can sign on to other lawmakers' bills so they can put their name next to a bill that they care about. So what you want to do once you've gotten your sponsors is to really find who are your allies, who already likes this bill, likes this issue, and who can you convince to actually physically put their name on the bill next to your sponsor. The more co-sponsors you have, the more kind of will it puts behind the bill. And you're saying, look at all this support. And these people care enough that they're literally putting their name next to it. So having co-sponsors is really helpful, especially because it kind of sometimes can nudge someone from being like, oh, I don't know if I want to put myself on the line for this bill, to say, okay, well, these four lawmakers that you trust and support co-sponsored the bill. So does that, and sometimes it'll help sway people to be like, oh, wow, okay, they were willing to support this bill. Is probably a pretty good one. So definitely find your supporters, find your co-sponsors. What allies are there? Maybe some of them won't want to put their name on it, but who can you count for sure are going to vote for your bill? This is really important. So this is really the bulk of the meeting with all these different lawmakers, really trying to identify who are your supporters. And the way that laws go through the process is they have to first go through committees that are by subject area. So before you ever go through your first committee, you want to meet with key committee members and the leaders of the committees. So there's like committee chairs, usually a committee vice chair. And then you'll have some committee members that have been on the committee for a while. So who maybe have been on the education committee for the last 8 years. You want to really focus on meeting with leadership, meeting with those key committee members. Ideally, you meet with every single person on the committee, but sometimes there's 40 people on a committee and you just can't reach them all. But really make sure you try to meet with as many as possible before, and so you can have a firm or loose idea of where each person stands. Having the committee chair supportive of your bill can do a lot for you. So definitely push those committee chairs and vice chairs, prioritize them, and they will have some sway over the other committee members. You'll want to identify your supporters and opponents. So if you find someone that is an opponent of the bill, or even it's just like a lean oppose, you want to make sure you're touching them as many times as possible. So you want to swing by their office, drop off one pagers, try to have multiple people approach them to talk about the bill. You just want to make sure you really touch base with those opponents to see if you can't flip them before the votes. And definitely sometimes if you talk to lawmakers, they might have some sway over someone else in the committee. So you might have a supporter that's willing to go talk to the opponent, who can help sway them either way. So definitely figure out who your supporters are and who your opponents are and target your work accordingly. Sometimes you'll just have someone that's a firm opponent and is never going to flip, but it's always worth a try. Yes, and then finding that you're approaching them who are close and inclined, gauge their level of support. Yeah, sometimes you'll just have to kind of sense in the meeting if if they're going to be a champion of the bill or if they're just a yes vote. And yeah, if appropriate, if you feel like someone's really going to champion the bill, ask them directly if they will co-sponsor the bill and have that sheet with you. The lawmaker's office will have the co-sponsor signature sheet. If you're going to ask someone to co-sponsor, make sure you have that sheet so they can sign it in that moment so they don't change their mind an hour later when you remember to bring the sheet. So bring that with you. So yeah, that's finding the support and co-sponsors. To continue working the bill, AWAKE finds it really important. Some orgs may feel different, but we really care about grassroots advocacy. So making sure that we have people actually on the ground across the state that are advocating for that bill. So you want to engage in grassroots advocacy. You want to tell people about your bill, tell them about why you think it matters. And if you can, encourage them to contact their lawmakers or contact key committee members, encouraging them to vote for your bill. There's a lot of really great tools. We use Every Action to have people just call and email their lawmakers with a quick push of a button. But even if you can just share the phone number of the certain committee members with the people you care about and asking them to just give them a call. That works just as well. So yeah, we really find it important to engage in that grassroots advocacy, having people show up when the bill is getting voted on in committee, just making sure you have people on the ground that support the bill. And it always helps to have lawmakers be contacted by constituents. So if you can find that, it's really helpful. It gives them some more force behind to vote for your bill. Just gonna take a quick sip of water. Um, And as you're doing all of that advocacy and contacting committee members, meeting with them, you want to keep an updated vote count spreadsheet. So, this is something that lobbyists and organizations and individuals need to keep up to date so they know where each person stands so they can make sure their bill gets through each committee. So, here's an example of a vote count spreadsheet. This was for our floor vote for one of our fertility bills. But basically, what we have is how I like to set mine up. Now, something else totally different might work for you, but I tend to have the representative or the senator's name here. And then I have their votes. So sometimes you'll have like additional votes on like amendments, but you'll have their vote on the bill, and the note section is really important. So I will always kind of guess what their vote is before going into a committee meeting or session. So, based on my meeting with them, I always try to ask them at the end, so can I count on your support for the bill? And go from there. Because if you don't ask the straight up question, you're guessing the whole time, you're going to have a less accurate vote count spreadsheet. So, if you can ask directly at the end of the meeting, they're not always going to tell you. Honestly, a lot of times they won't tell you how they're going to vote on a bill. That just is what it is. But you can kind of sense from the meeting, good amount of the time, kind of where they fall. Some of them will literally give you nothing in a meeting. They'll be like, "Okay, thanks for being here. Thanks for telling me," and you're just like, "Okay." So sometimes you won't know, but if you do, I like to predict on that vote on the bill column. And then I always try to add some notes in the note section. So, maybe they brought up a question that you didn't have the answer to. Well, maybe I'm going to jot a quick note. Hey, follow up with them on this. Or I might want to write a note. They seemed really supportive of this bill because of this. Or this argument really seemed to connect with them, or they needed more data. So just like keeping notes up to date of how they're standing, where you feel like they fit, is really helpful to have those notes kept. And then for us, we had an amendment situation, so we had to keep track of both. And then after the actual vote happens, I update it with the actual vote count. So I'll do my predicted vote count. You can have its own column of your predicted versus regular vote, but I just keep it all in one. And then replace whatever your prediction was with the actual votes on the bill so that when you're going to the next committee in the floor, you know how everyone has voted before then. Um, I like to color code based on like where they stand, doing like a red as like a firm no, like orange as like they're kind of on the fence, green as a support. But truly up to you. Just wanted to give you an example of a vote count spreadsheet to go off of if that's something you want to do. So yeah, ideally you'll go through all your committees, you'll pass your bill with flying colors, you'll have all the votes you need. Make sure that you have the votes before floor session. So what's tough about floor session votes is a lot of times you're not going to be able to reach all 99 House members before your floor vote or 33 senators. But you want to make sure between your committees and maybe your aligned supporters who aren't in those committees are all lined up to vote yes. If you have anyone who still has questions, making sure you're circling up with them, but do what you can to make sure you have the votes before a floor session so you can know you're going to pass it through the floor no problem. And then importantly, you want to make sure you pass matching language out of the House and Senate. So maybe the Senate adds an amendment at some point, and that completely changes the bill. You want to make sure that the House has that matching amendment, because if your bill passes both House and Senate with different language, you're going to have a whole nother process you have to go through. So want to make sure that you have matching language, that all the amendments that are on one bill are on the other, and you're in agreement about that. Usually your sponsors will be totally fine with like matching the language. If it doesn't, it's a whole fun process. But yeah, you want to make sure that that language is passing out of the House and the Senate identically. And then your final step is just getting the governor to sign that bill into law. So most of the time, you won't need to do a whole lot of advocacy around the governor signing. As we've seen, he's only ever vetoed one bill in his entire Governor Lee's entire tenure. Um, and the governor does not have to physically sign the bill. They have 10 days besides a Sunday to sign the bill into law. And if they don't do anything, the bill will just go into effect and it will effectively be signed. So um, it's good to just like check base, make sure that the governor is good with it, try to send an email, but most of the time you should be fine once you get it there. And importantly, once you get your bill passed, you want to celebrate your hard work. So celebrate what you did and your accomplishments. Really take time to savor your wins because sometimes we just move on from the wins or we're so not used to them. We're just like, okay, we got to move on. So make sure you celebrate your hard work. And then an important step is to follow up and make sure your law gets implemented and slash enforced. So it's important sometimes when you pass a bill to double check, make sure it's actually getting implemented. So for example, the Reproductive Justice Coalition 2 years ago passed a bill that allowed people on 10 care to get 12-month supplies of birth control. But we wanted to make sure people knew about that. So some follow-up implementation has happened. We're reaching out to 10 care administrators, making sure that they are advising folks that they have this, and then doing some follow-up research to make sure people are aware of this new law and making sure that people ask for it. So really important sometimes. Some bills you might not need enforcement. Maybe you have like a right to something bill that doesn't need implementation or enforcement. But for those ones that do, make sure you're following up. Because what good is a bill if it's not actually being implemented? So yeah, make sure that. And then get to work on that next bill. I know just when you finish that, you're ready for a new one. So get ready to get to work. I'm going to pause here. Kelly, do we have any questions? Don't see any. Okay.
Not so far.
Okay. I know it kind of zoomed through that, and there's like a lot of niche in there. But if you have any questions, throw it in the chat or in the Q&A. But someone had submitted a question before here about kind of like what timeline, like a rough timeline to go off of. So I'm going to kind of walk you through this timeline. Now, this could be totally different for you and might work for other people, but this is kind of traditionally in the last 2 years, like this is kind of the timeline we roughly follow and other orgs tend to follow. So yeah. So the legislature, as you might know, starts in January, usually runs through March to April, depending on the year. So kind of the rough timeline we tend to follow is that in that summer after the session and early fall, that's really where you're doing that researching and narrowing down of solutions, understanding the issue, all of that fun stuff. So take your time understanding that in the summer, early fall. You're really going to want to start to settle down on that final bill in November or early December. So really make sure you're getting down to it because if you're waiting until January to have your final bill, you're going to be running behind. So settle on that final bill, get the bill language you're comfortable with. And then in late December, early January, you're going to want to start finding and securing sponsors. So each lawmaker in the House of Representatives has a bill limit. It's traditionally been 10 to 15. It has varied by the years. Sometimes it's 12. But regardless, House sponsors have a limited number of bills. So you want to make sure you're going in, getting your bill filed by your sponsor before they run out. And there's also a bill filing deadline. Usually it's in early February for Tennessee. So if you don't get your bill filed and sponsored by the first week of February, you're out of luck. So you definitely want to be starting to find and secure those sponsors in December and January, the end of January at the like latest. And then yes, you want to have that bill filed in January or at least very least before the bill filing deadline in February. And then in February to March, that's really when you're going to want to be having that bill go through its committees. Now you can intentionally kind of wait when to actually put the bill on notice. So that's when it actually starts going through the process. You can like file the bill and just wait forever to never move the bill, but ideally here you're moving the bill. You might want to wait until the little bit later in session. You might want to run it first thing out the gate. That'll kind of be a conversation with your sponsor usually. But committees do close. So, especially the more niche committees like population health or the insurance subcommittee, some of those really do start to close pretty early, like at the beginning of sometimes late February, early March. Your bill obviously needs to be heard before that committee closes. So, make sure you're getting running that bill before the committees close so that you don't run yourself out of time. So you want to start passing that bills out of committee before they close. And then obviously before the legislature adjourns, you're going to want to get that bill passed on both floors and signed by the governor. So it's a rough timeline. But obviously things can go different. You might have not been able to research your bill until November and have it done in January. It really depends, but this is kind of like a rough timeline that what you could follow. And that's all I've got for you. So we've got about 15 minutes to spare for some questions and final thoughts. I'm going to open it up, give some time for y'all to think, process, and throw some questions in there. That is a good question. What percentage of bills become law? It really does vary. I don't have an exact percentage for you, but just kind of like based on last year alone, there was around 1,500 bills filed and about 250 to 300 that actually became law. So I don't, quick math there. Yeah, not that much. I was gonna try to do math, but I'm not gonna even try. But not a whole lot. There's a lot of bills that get filed, a lot of ideas, but really only a smaller percentage of them actually go into law for a lot of different reasons. Okay. Would you suggest southern states? Yeah. So Elle asked, when you said to look at similar states, would you suggest southern? Yes. I would highly recommend when looking for like Tennessee specific laws, looking at southern states. Anyone that has a similar political makeup to us and kind of similar political climate is helpful. I think some of the Midwestern states are also helpful. So looking at Indiana, Ohio, kind of like a Wisconsin, Missouri, those can also be helpful for similar. Yeah, but just looking at states that have a similar, we have a Republican supermajority, so we've got Republican House, Senate, and governor. So looking at other states that have a similar political makeup to that. I mean, you can still look at obviously some of the like bluer, more urban states, but yeah, you're definitely going to want the most comparable. Do you have any last questions before we move on? Okay. Well, I'm going to send these slides out to you guys after. So if you have any questions after the fact when you're looking over them, please don't hesitate to email and ask me. I'm happy to answer them. So, just wrapping up, I want to look forward. So, we are doing a policy action team happy hour on June 26th at 6 p.m. at Streetcar Taps. So, this is where you can socialize with other policy action team members and sign up for some summer advocacy projects. We have some really exciting, I think, projects that we need your guys' help on. So, you can hear about these different projects, sign up for some tasks, ways to actually feel like you're doing something helping a wake out. So that is going to be on June 26th at 6 p.m. Streetcar Taps, that's over in West Nashville. So Kelly dropped the link in the chat for registering. Please go ahead and register. But we'd love to see you there. And then lastly, Awake is a small nonprofit, and we really rely on amazing generosity of donors to keep us fueled. So, if you are passionate about this work, you're passionate about Awake, we would really encourage you to drop a donation, anything as low as $5, any more. We really appreciate it. We also have something called the Advocates Society, and these are our monthly donors. So, people give as little as $5, $10, $15 a month or more. And these are Advocate Society members. There's some fun perks that come with that. So if you feel so called, if you have the finances right now, we really appreciate it so we can offer trainings like this. Yeah, that's kind of the bulk of it, but I did want to preview a little bit. So we are going to be having an exciting new summer training program kind of launching coming soon, where we will have a series of different trainings where you can purchase a pass for the entire summer training series, which will get you access to 4+ trainings. And I just kind of wanted to sneak preview exclusively for you guys. Our first training is going to be focusing on state takeovers, preemption of local laws, and other democracy disruptors that the state has been engaging in. So if that's something you're interested in, keep on the lookout. We'll be announcing that summer training schedule soon, where you can get that pass and get access to everything, and Advocate Society members will have free access to everything. So yeah, that's my little sneak preview. I'm gonna stick around. You guys have extra 10 minutes, so if you come up with any questions, just let me know. But thank you so much for being here, y'all.